Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution that the Honourable the House of Assembly concur in the amendments made by the Honourable the Senate to the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies Bill 2024. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43 and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
No. That those standing orders so mentioned be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. The honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Government's business is the order of the day. Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, ma'am, I wish to move that order number 8 be read as a cognate debate, as both bills are inextricably linked.
Question is that order number 8 be read as a cognate debate. Honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Order number 8 is now order of the day.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not surprising that Barbados's economic success has been linked inextricably with its political stability. And as I come to conduct this debate this morning, it is against the backdrop that this country, being small, requires us to be absolutely focused, Madam Deputy Speaker, on how we conduct ourselves as parliamentarians, how we as political parties, Madam Deputy Speaker, project confidence in relation to what happens not just in Barbados, but certainly what happens outside of Barbados, and how we are capable of managing that. And I'm proud to stand here this morning to say to you, and through you, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the rest of the country, that the Barbados Labour Party continues to provide global leadership, regional leadership, as well as local leadership in relation to stabilizing our fiscal circumstance, Madam Deputy Speaker, but equally ensuring that we create an atmosphere that is conducive for inclusive growth, which is what we have committed ourselves to doing. And therefore, political stability, sir, sorry, ma'am, political stability, my apologies,
Yes, sir.
is at the center of what we do and how it impacts the lives of our citizens. And therefore, it is not surprising that the record of the Barbados Labour Party in managing the economic affairs of this country has been rooted in fundamentally being a stable political institution, because the importance of us getting it right, Madam Deputy Speaker, makes a significant difference to the conduct of business in Barbados by locals, as well as those who come to invest from abroad. And therefore, it is against that backdrop that this corporation top-up tax bill I present this morning, along with the income tax amendments, has to be framed, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the context that Barbados absolutely deserves the right leadership to continue the recovery based on what we observed over the last decade, Madam Deputy Speaker, and therefore let us not be fooled. The Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program that we set about in 2018 continues in spite of the significant damage caused by the last administration, not just to the reputation of this country, but equally to the fiscal and the normative circumstance that people expected to have from a government providing stability in the first instance and relative certainty, given that Barbados is a small, open economy navigating what is a complex global environment. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, Barbadians would be reminded that almost every budget, they will be treated to some increase in tax by the last administration. And over the course of the last 6 years, we have sought to create an environment, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is as stable as possible, that will allow for domestic investment as well as foreign investment, such that we're able to open up and unlock opportunities for broad investment in mobilizing resources domestically as well as across the region to be able to ensure that Barbados can recover, and it can recover in an inclusive manner. And the pieces of legislation that are here before the chamber this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, are aligned with respect to what we are trying to achieve in terms of being able to utilize regulations which are agreed at a global level to be able to reposition Barbados for growth, inclusive growth, but equally to be able to build resilience as we seek to achieve not just the SDGs by 2030, but also to achieve climate resilience in so doing. And it is important to recognize that as we seek to do the traditional sources of financing, that we must be capable of using the tax system to unlock areas of investment that are strategically aligned with the national objectives, particularly as it relates to building capacity for growth and to allow our citizens to be able to invest in order to be a part of the recovery, and therefore being able to ensure that households and communities, Madam Deputy Speaker, are sufficiently resilient such that, as we all know, when the world becomes a little more uncertain, that we will be able to have built sufficient capacity and buffers to help shield fully the cushion of those impacts which we know have been coming very fast and very furious. And therefore, these objectives are critical, and it requires absolute focus on the part of the government and all of the stakeholders to ensure that we do not get distracted, Madam Deputy Speaker, between who is the leader or who wants to be the leader, because at the end of the day, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government and the people of this country requires absolute focus on the very things that matter in the lives of ordinary Barbadians. We take this duty very seriously. And we have engaged in a, what might be a marathon, if you like, Madam Deputy Speaker, in consultations not just with domestic businesses, taxpayers. We've also engaged at the multilateral level within the context of the FATF, which the Honourable Attorney General, you heard the Prime Minister allude to in the budget, of working through systematically with the team that he assembled to address those 53 things that we found upon assuming office that had Barbados on the blacklist for not being compliant on a range of matters that impacted our ability to do business. We also, Madam Deputy Speaker, had to address in a frontal way the fact that in addition to those supposed deficiencies, the country's reputation had been downgraded 23 times because we were perceived, Madam Deputy Speaker, to not be worthy of being able to borrow on the international market or from anybody, for that matter, unless we had to pay significant costs. Equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, within the OECD framework, there were issues with which our systems were not aligned with what was required of us, and this government set about in the last 6 years to equally also address those issues within the context of the European Union and those areas. We did a similar exercise, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ensure that we in government, along with the stakeholders in the private sector, and I want to thank them for the very long hours of engagement that certainly has led us to this stage, where we've had to ensure that the practitioners in the space fully appreciate, as well as the businesses fully appreciate, that the government is taking these matters very seriously, and that between the Central Bank of Barbados, the Financial Services Commission, the Barbados Revenue Authority, CAIPO as a regulatory agency, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Anti-Money Laundering Unit, and a range of other supporting departments, that we've created now a system that allows the country to be able to be much more nimble in relation to not just how we exchange information, but to ensure that over the course of the last 6 years, we've done all of the legislative adjustments. We've put the necessary systems in place, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that Barbados' reputation will not be sullied simply because we do not have the ability to respond in time, or that we are not capable of providing the necessary analysis or analyses in order to ensure that our reputation is sound. And this is part of that framework, Madam Deputy Speaker, because when we converged our tax system in 2018, and you would recall, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the former member for St. Michael North came to this Parliament with about, I think it was about 14 pieces of legislation in December of 2018. It was as a result of the previous administration agreeing to dismantle the corporate tax structure without really telling anybody or putting any mechanism in place to respond. And therefore, assuming office, we had to move very quickly and urgently to be able to see where we would land Barbados, given that we had just entered a program which was supported by the International Monetary Fund in order to repair the reputation of Barbados, and therefore we had to reform the tax system then. And I say that against the context that ordinarily we would not take such drastic measures in the way that we did, but given the commitment of the previous administration, we had no choice but to be able to move to a direction where we converge all of the tax rates in order to ensure that we created a platform in relation to creating a relatively stable environment. Since then, as you may be aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, the world has agreed that as it relates to firms operating globally, multinational enterprises, who earn more than 750 million euros, or approximately 850 million US dollars, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there should be a global minimum tax that all of these entities pay, irrespective of where they operate. And Barbados is a part of that framework in relation to ensuring that these entities all pay their fair share of taxes. Now, bear in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when we had our corporation tax rates at around 25% or 30%. We had a range of allowances, just like in most jurisdictions across the world now, who will say that they have similar tax rates. The number of loopholes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that allows entities to be able to offset the tax that they pay are so large, that it effectively makes the nominal tax rate, you're really making a mockery of it, given the quantum of allowances that are allowed in relation to expenses to be deducted. And therefore, when we converged, we simplified our allowance system and focused on the very things, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we knew we needed to focus on as a country, such as research and development and training and the like, in order to make sure that we focus on those areas that we knew would have been critical at that particular point in time. You heard the Prime Minister, again, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the budget of this year, identify national areas of strategic importance that we too now want to make sure that as we signal to all and sundry how we are going to utilize not just traditional forms of financing, but being able to identify areas within which we want to help mobilize private resources to be able to help Barbados achieve climate resilience, but also achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, especially given that we've gone through COVID, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had a number of natural disasters impact us in 2021 in particular. And since then, we've seen the evolution of a number of external economic shocks, starting with the war in Ukraine. We had the global supply chain disruption when the boat was stuck in the Suez Canal. We're having issues now where, for example, the level of rainfall is now impacting the amount of water, the volume of water within the Panama Canal, which is also affecting the rate at which the ships are able to transit through there, and therefore there's still a knock-on effect in relation to that. And all of these things matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, to how we do things in Barbados, because we do not have the capacity to produce everything that we can consume or we need in Barbados. And therefore, as a result, it requires us to be able to import, and therefore the kind of lifestyle that we as Barbadians have become accustomed to has to be predicated on how do we create an enabling environment, not just for inward investment and domestic investment, Madam Deputy Speaker, but investment that is geared towards earning foreign exchange in order to ensure that we have the capacity or the buffer such that when things happen internationally, that we can absorb some of those shocks as best we can, whilst being able to mitigate by being able to boost domestic production of things in strategic areas that will allow us to be able to help substitute some of that foreign exchange in order to make sure that we have a stable environment. And therefore, the reforms that we've undertaken broadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, continues to, I think, put Barbados in a position whereby, not just from a confidence perspective in terms of the domestic space, but we are seeing renewed interest in people wanting to not just invest in Barbados, but work alongside Barbadians to be able to see how we can connect and ensure that we get similar levels of rates of return for the high level of savings that we have within the domestic space. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have determined, as you heard the Prime Minister announce in November in this chamber, when she addressed the matter of the global minimum tax, that commencing January 1st of this year, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we would move away from the sliding scale that we had introduced in December of 2018 for corporate entities. And to the extent that we would now have within the domestic space a tax rate of 9% for all businesses operating in Barbados from January 1st of 2024. We also identified then, Madam Deputy Speaker, that for small businesses, registered under the Small Business Development Act. So let me just make sure that people understand that. For small businesses registered under the Small Business Development Act, that their tax rate will be 5.5%. But all other businesses, if you're not a registered small business, the domestic rate will now be 9%. And therefore, in order for us to make sure then that we are consistent with the application of the global minimum tax rules, the GLOBE rules as they're called, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill this morning is seeking to ensure that Barbados signals to all and sundry that the top-up tax between the 9 and the 15%, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those companies, and they declare for those companies above that threshold of 750 million euros or 850 million US dollars, depending on where the exchange rate is at any given point in time. That is the threshold, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those companies that will be impacted. Now, here's the thing, Madam Deputy Speaker. The companies either pay the tax in Barbados or they will pay the tax in the jurisdiction for which they are domiciled. And this framework allows Barbados and Barbadians to be able to say to all and sundry that any company, and we actually do have some domestic companies who who meet that threshold, and therefore, as in Barbadian companies, who fall within that threshold, and then there are others who operate from Barbados who equally fall, who cross that threshold. And therefore, in order for Barbados to defend its own reputation, Madam Deputy Speaker, and so that when we are peer-reviewed, this framework allows us, and certainly allows the Barbados Revenue Authority as the competent authority, the entity that exchanges information with other tax authorities across the world, so that if a country isn't sure, Madam Deputy Speaker, that your business isn't paying the appropriate amount of tax, they can inquire from the Barbados Revenue Authority as to your operations in Barbados and globally to ensure that the level of taxes that you are paying, not just in Barbados but in other jurisdictions, is commensurate with that ideal of ensuring that those large multinational enterprises, that they pay their fair share of tax globally. And therefore, there are not a lot of those companies of Barbadian origin, but Barbados has long created an environment where companies want to do their work from here. They do their work from here. They provide a large number of jobs for Barbadians, our constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker. And therefore, this is important from the perspective that in order for us to ensure that we signal to all and sundry where Barbados stands in relation to the global minimum tax, this piece of legislation sets out where we make the necessary provisions such that for those entities that are operating here, we've had a series of consultations with those entities who have been long-standing and actually want to remain in Barbados, that this is the new framework and regime that will take place. Now, if you're not above that threshold, Madam Deputy Speaker, then the 9% applies to everybody else, except you're a small business. And that has been in place since January 1st of this year, 2024. And therefore, we are now, and again, in a sense, providing certainty to the business community in relation to where Barbados stands in relation to not just the global tax system, but how the Barbados Labour Party intends to manage, Madam Deputy Speaker, the tax policy as it relates to Barbados' fiscal situation. Now, you heard the Prime Minister in the budget indicate very clearly to Barbadians, Mr. Speaker, that there will be no new taxes introduced this year. Where we stand now, we expect to see some upside as countries come on board with respect to the implementation of these rules, and as we transition from 2024 to 2025, where in 2025 all companies operating globally will be subject to these regulations. We are transitioning to, during this year, to ensure only for 2024, just to be clear, only for 2024, that for those companies whose original jurisdiction have not yet implemented the legislation, that only for 2024, Madam Deputy Speaker, those companies will remain on the previous sliding scale, a 1-year effective transition, if you like, to 2025, and therefore it is important to signal that, because we are conscious that all companies require certainty in relation to where we are going. And therefore, having done the consultations, we are confident that the piece of legislation that we have here puts Barbados in the best possible position, Madam Speaker, to be able to help transition from what would have been the previous system into the new system in a way that is relatively smooth, Madam Deputy Speaker, and therefore allows us now to be able to signal how we are going to manage tax policy in order to drive how we achieve not just the Sustainable Development Goals, but equally respond to the climate crisis. And I wish to remind the Chamber that having identified those priority areas in the budget a couple months ago, we've already started in earnest in relation to developing the framework within which we will operate there, to be able, as we transition in this period, to ensure that the credits that we've put in place allows companies to do that investment on behalf of the people of Barbados, therefore allowing us to be able to effectively utilize that as some additional fiscal space to achieve things in areas of priority, whether it is areas in respect of the marine preservation areas that we identify. And as you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, the debt swap that we did 2 years ago, supported by the IDB as well as the TNC, that we now want to ensure that we work alongside all of the investors along the coast of Barbados to ensure that they too can help advance some of the works that need to be done to protect not just their investment, but protect the beaches, to protect the coral reefs, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of coral reef restoration, to preserve the marine environment, and that is a critical area that is of national importance, and therefore working alongside the Coastal Zone Management Unit as the ultimate protector of our coastal zone, working alongside them, then we know that we'll be able to unlock significant investment to build resilience, climate resilience for the country, and to be able to ensure then that the businesses operating within those environments, that they can play a significant role too in protecting their investment, and ultimately ensuring then that Barbados has the capacity to be able to grow and grow in a sustainable way, and therefore we are utilizing, again, the tax system through policy to be able to unlock some of those investments. We've also identified areas of R&D that we believe are critical in areas of pharmaceuticals and the like, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a growth area, given we have invested significantly in producing a number of scientists at the University of West Indies. And you will recall that we came to this chamber very early in 2018, Madam Deputy Speaker, to redouble, in a sense, the investment in our people by removing the tuition fees that was put in place by the last administration. And therefore, rather than seeing the university as a problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have determined that we will open up opportunities for research and development to keep as many of our Barbadian, very talented Barbadian scientists here, in order to ensure that Barbados can build the capacity to be able to do world-class things, Madam Deputy Speaker. And therefore, when we speak to policy coherence, it's important to understand that, as I've said to the OECD, I've said to the competent authorities, officials that are here, that Barbados' development is inextricably linked to how we are able to build sufficient human capital, human intelligence, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to solve not just problems in Barbados, but to help solve global problems. And therefore, by being able to focus very clearly in some of these areas, we know that if we put our absolute focus in helping Barbadians to be able to achieve in some of these areas, the return on that investment, Madam Deputy Speaker, will be significant. And that is what this government has committed to doing. We will continue to do so, but it requires us to be able to ensure that we are laser-like and focused in order to make sure then that the balance between the investment on the private side and what we can ensure that at the back end, because R&D sometimes takes some time before it becomes marketable. The reality is that you have to choose a few areas, which we've done, particularly within pharmaceuticals. Given our demographic profile, especially in areas where we know that there needs to be better research done with black populations and medicines that are tailored specifically for our demographic, we are absolutely confident that that investment will pay off for us, because at the end of it, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to make sure that we also are able to provide, again, as we've continued to do, proper access to health services, which includes significant R&D within not just the pharmaceutical, but within the medical research space, which will allow us to be able to drive not just innovation, but equally allow for greater productivity if we're able to solve those problems in collaboration with those who operate globally. And therefore, this is not just an exercise about what the level of the tax rate will be. This is about how do we reposition Barbados strategically, Madam Deputy Speaker, using as one part of the tax system to be able to facilitate Barbados' development, our growth, in order to ensure that, again, as I said, we can build resilience, meet the SDG goals by 2030, and equally be able to allow for some level of enfranchisement with Barbadians in a way that is significant. Now, the result of all of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that we want to see more companies operating in Barbados. We want to see more companies growing, and effectively, the environment that we are trying to create here, Madam Deputy Speaker, is really to provide, again, the kind of leadership to Barbadians and the rest of the region in relation to how we transition. Now, coincidentally, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, if Barbados, well, not say if, Barbados has been known to be a leader in the region. And I believe that under the last administration, there was a sense of complacency. Complacency that meant that we were not as focused and agile as we ought to be in relation to further building that capacity. And I will remind you and the public, remind the public through you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that whatever we do, the focus has to be how do we leverage the long history of investment that we've made in our people, and these reforms that we are undertaking are all inextricably linked, Madam Deputy Speaker, and therefore, whilst we're here this morning to speak about tax, I want to say to Barbadians, wherever you are, that getting ourselves in order is important if we are going to develop the right type of policy interventions that can help grow the sectors or the industries that businesses are operating in. And that means, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the sharing of data and information with the government is going to be key. And the reason that that is the case is because as we have continued to engage and advocate on Barbados' behalf, Madam Deputy Speaker, certainly my engagements, through my engagement, I should say, persons have reached out to say they want to do these things in Barbados. But oftentimes, people see it as a threat in terms of people wanting to come and take the market space. When, in truth, in fact, sometimes it is more about healthy competition in the first instance, but then two, the collaborative effort now that is required, Madam Deputy Speaker, to not just see Barbados as just 166 square miles, but being able to leverage the, as I said, the capital that we do have to scale that up in order to ensure that we can do more export. And I think that is where there is somewhat of a disconnect between where people in the private sector may believe, some may believe, that if you give the government information that we just want to tax you. And I can be honest with you, Madam Deputy Speaker, we want to collect the tax, yes. But the key is to grow. So if we get the right kind of information, it means that the right tax level can be applied that encourages growth rather than having a situation where you got some people hiding and ducking from the BRA or the NIS. They want to do things, but because they're not providing the kind of information, then we really can't help forge the relationships. Why? Because when people come in and want to do business, they want to do business with people that they know are credible, Madam Deputy Speaker. They want to do business with credible people. And therefore, no matter where you are, there's always an option for us being able to ensure that there is regularity to all of our actions. Now, I have seen instances where we have been able to help businesses grow simply by being able to have an exchange of information with the government to ensure that the right policy framework can be set in place, the right links can be made in the appropriate jurisdictions to expand business. And that is what the government is really here to do. And with that expansion, it means more revenue for the country. We can better deliver the services that people want and need, Madam Deputy Speaker. And therefore, it allows us then to be able to monitor and ensure that, one, we don't have a situation developing where people feel as if they're being targeted as they were under the last administration, when every time the Minister of Finance came to this place, there was an increase in tax in somewhere on the very same people who were already paying taxes and certainly were experiencing a significant deterioration in the quality of the public services. And I don't need to go back there to remind you, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the sewage that was flowing in the streets for almost 3 years, because these are the things that require absolute focus to ensure that the entire ecosystem, nobody is going to invest, Madam Deputy Speaker, in improving the plant if the public services are not up to scratch. And therefore, you must appreciate that we need information to ensure that we get the compliance right in relation to taxation, so that the government itself, as we go and we meet with partners to open up access to markets, that the private sector is alongside sharing the right type of information to be able to help to do that. Because I will love Barbadian companies, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I know it is indeed possible in this very digital age that there's some young enterprising boy or girl who might be sitting common entrance today, Madam Deputy Speaker, who might come up with a brilliant idea and in 2-3 years got the world upside down and earning billions of dollars. And therefore, we have to be capable of supporting, not just from an accounting or legal perspective, but supporting those types of individuals, because in the world that we live in today, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is driven by data and information and content. You still have the bread and butter things, the stuff that you need to touch and feel, of course. But the world is driven by data and information today. And the development of artificial intelligence is an area that we could easily see a few companies springing up out of Barbados that will meet these thresholds. And therefore, our investment in our developing our capacity at the Revenue Authority and the other regulatory agencies to support such an endeavor is going to be important if any of those young people find themselves in a situation where they need to be able to get good policy advice in terms of how to pursue in order to protect their own investment and how we all may be able to invest in that particular space. And therefore, these two pieces of legislation here today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe are fundamentally important to how we can reposition Barbados for the future. If people believe that all we are out to do is to tax you, Madam Deputy Speaker, then I believe you're maybe in the wrong space, because this country and its standard of living, I probably should say standards of living, because I know Barbadians know full well the standard of living that they experience under the Barbados Labour Party. And I know all too well that they remember fully the standard that they were living under the Democratic Labour Party. And therefore, it is important to appreciate that the investment that is required to ensure that you lift the standard, not lower it, lift the standard, means that each of us got to get up every day, Madam Deputy Speaker. If you're in the public service, what have you done today, or what will you do today that will help somebody grow their business today and tomorrow? And if you're in the private sector, Madam Deputy Speaker, what are you doing today to ensure that your company can grow and get to a point where you're exporting and earning foreign exchange? If those are not the things that you're thinking about, then it means you're likely not to be as successful as you think you may be. The world is moving along, Madam Deputy Speaker. It means that all of us have to adapt and adopt to changing standards. And by the same token, we in the government, in surveilling the environment, we too, anchored in our Barbados economic recovery and transformation, recognize that there are opportunities that you can take advantage of. But the only way you can do that is if there's a collaborative approach between the private sector and the government, being able to share accurate and credible information to be able to connect and mobilize investment in order for us to be able to do that. And I say so because I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, having established the Office of the African Exempt Bank here in Barbados, I know the Minister of Agriculture and the member for St. Philip North is working to establish the food terminal which will help Barbados and the region, working with Guyana and Suriname to be able to reduce our imports, our food imports by 25% by 2025, is in train, will require private investment facilitated by government. And therefore, these are areas that we believe the type of financing and arrangements and the collaboration within the local as well as the regional private sector will be important. Barbados is positioning itself to be a logistics hub, and that too will form part of how we are able to build out a different ecosystem in Barbados. Madam Deputy Speaker, since the pandemic, we've almost seen an explosion in logistics activities. And it has not abated in spite of the fact that people are traveling again. And I believe we have a genuine opportunity as we look forward to welcoming Barbadians from abroad next year as we mark today being May 7th, I believe, in a week's time, if my memory serves me correctly, is when the British would have landed here in 1625. So as we mark the 400th year of the modern settlement of Barbados, I believe that logistics, moving people, moving packages, moving water, moving information, you name it, moving garbage, people, and the like, logistics is going to become a much more important element for the development of Barbados. And therefore, we have to recognize that the data and the advancements that we've done within the customs to be able to facilitate these things will be new businesses and new areas of businesses that Barbados can get into. And therefore, we have to reposition and ensure that our regulations permit that. And as we have been discussing, certainly within the context of the British Initiative, Madam Deputy Speaker, there have been wide-ranging discussions about how do we facilitate a different regime for international shipping. There will be some further announcements within that particular space, but suffice it to say, logistics will become a critical part of what we do. And we would love to be able to ensure then that there are more entities operating in Barbados to be able to move more global trade between Latin America, between Africa and the like. And in so doing, we are setting up these systems to be able to accommodate what we see as strategic areas for genuine, substantive economic activity out of Barbados. And therefore, again, aligning the legislative framework with what we perceive to be substantive business being able to be done out of Barbados. By the same token, we've already signaled that we want to increase our rum exports, Madam Deputy Speaker, from just north of 100 million US to $1 billion US, Madam Deputy Speaker, by 2030. The logistics around that, as well as the impact with respect to the revenues for the entities operating out of Barbados, will be significant. And therefore, we are priming ourselves to make sure that we have the necessary framework to be able to say to the rest of the world, this is the substantive business that's being done in Barbados, so that when we self-certify that Barbados is compliant because we have these activities happening in Barbados, that our reputation, Mr. Speaker, unless it is a wicked and vindictive thing being done by somebody out there, we would be able to say we have provided all of the necessary technical information. All of the companies will be able to exchange information with whichever tax authority to be able to verify and validate that the substance of the activity taking place in Barbados and with whom we're doing it with, that is legitimate, Madam Deputy Speaker, and therefore the adherence to the global rules and the application and interpretation of those global rules, Barbados intends to ensure that it mounts the most robust advocacy, because we believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that unless your government is out there to defend the interests of ordinary Barbadians, the interests of businesses in this country, then it would mean that we will not be in a position to ensure that we can improve upon the standard of living that persons have in this country. And therefore, we cannot take any of these things for granted, because these are the things that will have a significant impact on any government's ability to be able to help ensure that we can provide a high quality of public goods and public services without necessarily having to directly move to taxing people in the way that was done under the previous administration. Let me reiterate, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we have developed a posture of trying to move away from direct taxation and try to move towards indirect taxation, whilst being able to ensure we can improve the quality of the public goods and public services that we're offering. And that is still our trajectory. And therefore, as we put these mechanisms in place, Madam Deputy Speaker, then we are confident that we can continue to do that, and notwithstanding the fact that not all countries have moved at the same time, we are confident that by 2025 everything will be in place outside of Barbados. But the reality of it is that in us being able to say to the rest of the world today that Barbados is, by passage of this legislation, adopting the globe rules, it then means that there are opportunities now for us, Madam Deputy Speaker, that were not there before, for us now to be able to do some more bilateral treaties with countries all over the world who may have viewed Barbados as being a low tax jurisdiction before, and therefore now potentially opening up more avenues of business for companies operating in Barbados. And therefore, when we do this piece of legislation, as I said, once we are able to negotiate through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Energy and Business, the double taxation treaties, along with Ministry of Finance, of course, to be able to ensure that we can get these things executed as quickly as possible, then there are additional opportunities where we can open up spaces and therefore allow Barbadians to then have an additional avenue for investment, which then helps to be able to grow, Madam Deputy Speaker, grow the pie, so to speak. And therefore, this is also why we are bringing this piece of legislation here today, because it is important that you place the pieces of the puzzle together in a coherent manner, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you seek to chart the way towards being able to have Barbados being a world-class country by 2030. And therefore, speed is of the essence, and therefore, really and truly, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I'm saying to the country is that you have to make the decisions quickly, implement them, Madam Deputy Speaker, get the right strategic partners on board in whatever sector or industry you may be operating in. And once you do that, Madam Deputy Speaker, then we can see a different posture for Barbados in the future. Now, that will help Barbados to be able to withstand, as much as it can, a lot of the global uncertainties that seem to be presenting themselves almost on a daily basis today. And whilst the government cannot shield fully everybody from every shock that exists, if we do these things, Madam Deputy Speaker, then we would have put ourselves in a position where, not just within our families and our communities, but at the national level, Barbados would be in a much better place to be able to withstand that which we know is coming, whether it is a natural disaster, whether it is the prospect of conflict in another part of the world leading to the escalation in energy prices or shortages in some particular commodity, Madam Deputy Speaker. Come what may, Barbados must always be in a position, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to not just survive, but we must be able to thrive, Madam Deputy Speaker. And that is why we must ensure that as we set about the implementation of these relatively, nobody gets excited about tax matters, Madam Deputy Speaker, but these are areas that Barbadians can get excited about the possibilities in relation to how you can create an ecosystem that allows genuinely your businesses to grow. And the officials at the Revenue Authority have been working tirelessly, and I thank them for what must have been a marathon set of work to be able to ensure that we have the systems in place and working collaboratively with all of the stakeholders to be able to put Barbados in a position where not just defend its reputation, but as I said, to be able to unlock areas of opportunities for growth. And this is an area that I want to wholeheartedly support, because rather than seeing the BRA as just tax collectors, Madam Deputy Speaker, we want to work collaboratively, certainly with the business community, to see where we can align the opportunities that we've identified so that we can help them, we meaning the entire ecosystem of government, to help them to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, thereby being able to deliver better terms and conditions for our people, better returns on investment for our people, in order to ensure, as I said, that we can build the resilience, meet the SDGs, and to be able to enhance the standard of living. Now, the legislation has a number of provisions, both sets of legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, many of which are extremely technical pieces of clauses here. But let me just indicate that in discussions yesterday with a number of the competent authorities over lunch, they all indicated that for the companies that they have to administer, especially given that companies operate all over the world, Madam Deputy Speaker, you have some multinational enterprises that operate in over 100 countries, 100 jurisdictions. And in particular, I was struck by a particular conversation where the competent authority from the particular country said, whilst they have the capacity to deal with stuff at the federal level, that they had also a number of, probably about 27 sub-regional or state levels, as well as almost 200 municipal or city types of regulations that they had to go through. And therefore, the complexity in trying to harmonize what is at the city level, what is at the state level, what is at the federal level, proved to be a challenge for them, let alone the fact that the same multinational might be operating in several other jurisdictions with several other similar complicated structures that they equally have to be able to do. And as I was listening to their experience about how they're implementing these rules, and I said, boy, be lucky because we don't have that level of complexity operating in Barbados. But they recognize that because of all of these complexities, they're trying to make it as simple as possible for all of these companies who exceed the threshold to be able to report and have the information exchanged across jurisdictions, simply because it is almost an administrative nightmare just within their own jurisdiction to be able to verify and validate in real time, unless you have the relevant IT systems, which they're doing. And we will be doing, so in listening from and hearing from some of them informally, we knew that the path that we are on and the things that we're introducing, that we are definitely on the right path, because we don't have the complexities of some of these countries to be able to administer. But it just reaffirmed in our own minds that the interventions that we are making, not just to digitize, but to ensure that it is as easy as possible for people to pay the Revenue Authority, and that's why when we did the digital payments system and the banks upgraded, again, I call on the business community, whether you're a vendor or the established business or whomever, and you heard the Prime Minister in relation to the budget this year about the credit for companies who will modernize their systems, digitize their systems, that they will get 100% credit in 1 year, to encourage the business community, no matter your level of activity, the importance of digitization is going to be absolutely key to how your business is able to perform going forward. Because that digitization effort, especially if you're a small business, Madam Deputy Speaker, will unlock access to finance issues that have been persisting for small businesses for a long time, because the digitization of those records will mean that whether you go to your credit union, whether you go to the trust loan, whether you go to fund access or a bank, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the recording of those transactions, that the financial institutions will be well aware as to what is your level of activity or turnover, so to speak, and be able to assess, well, what terms can I online you to help you then be able to further expand and to do more business? Because once the financial institutions are aware as to the level of activity you're undertaking, Madam Deputy Speaker, then adopting those interventions helps your business to grow, because you have the oxygen, so to speak, the financing to be able to do your expansion without having to utilize all of your own resources and take fully those risks. But the reality is that you have to make those decisions, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that not just from an administrative perspective as it relates to tax, but in relation to genuinely wanting to expand your business. And I know that the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology through Export Barbados have worked really hard to be able to introduce the Food Science Center at Newton, Madam Deputy Speaker, which means that any business person, really, any business person can go there and utilize that facility and be able, if my memory serves me correctly, they should be able to produce 10,000 units of whatever it is you put program into the system. You bring the raw materials, and you get your labels and everything done within an hour. 10,000 units an hour, Madam Deputy, ready for export, ready for whatever you want to do it, without you then having to go and find the capital for the equipment to do these things. And therefore, the government has invested strategically in areas to help people, but people now have to help themselves by being able to digitize. And therefore, it is important that as I listened to those exchanges yesterday with those persons, that Barbados is definitely on the right path to being able to grow this economy, definitely on the right path. The interventions that we're making with all of our reforms tells me very clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, that time really is money. Time really is money. The sooner you do these interventions, the sooner you have access to financing. It means then you're able to be in a better position to actually seize the opportunities that present themselves. So when we pass this legislation and we negotiate these additional double taxation treaties, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we go and say to the private sector, here, look, these are the areas of opportunity now that, not just from a tax perspective, but there are opportunities now for you to be able to get a foot in to a particular space. We now must be prepared mentally, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to go and seal the deal. The government will help, but the private sector now must be able to go and seal the deal to make sure that the opportunities don't go a-begging, and the others who have Barbados in their sights. And I don't mean that in a negative way, Madam Deputy Speaker, because Barbados has long been seen as a beacon in the region, and people gauge their own performance against Barbados, and therefore people who we may perceive to have been behind us before, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are taking advantage of these opportunities to ensure that they can catch Barbados. And there's nothing wrong with catching Barbados, Mr. Speaker, but we got to make sure we keep running too. And therefore, Barbados and Barbadians now must make sure that as we do all of this reform, open up opportunities for us to be able to access markets using tax policy as the mechanism to get through, then it is important to realize that if you can do business, you got to make sure that you got yourself right. Because when people do the due diligence, Madam Deputy Speaker, they will want to know that they're doing business with reputable firms, reputable people, and therefore absolutely critical that we are able to do that. So the simplicity of these filing obligations, I'm not a tax practitioner at all, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we've tried to make sure that we have as simple a process as possible, but it means rigorously looking at your data and making sure that, because it is as simple as you have yourself organized. That's as simple as I could put it, Madam Deputy Speaker. If you have your data organized, you're on top of your business and you know what you're doing, it means that you can get real-time reports, daily reports, weekly reports, monthly reports, and therefore making it easy to be able to account for the tax that you want to be able to assign to Barbados and elsewhere, and therefore, but these are large companies already with significant systems, as well as supporting professionals to be able to so do. But I would like that same kind of support, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the smallest company in Barbados, for the smallest vendor in Barbados. But we must adopt a similar standard to be able to help us to be able to move to a different level. And therefore, this domestic minimum top-up tax that we're speaking about today, I believe, is a model that all businesses really should aspire to, because it would mean that if we can move as many businesses over that threshold because of strategic and smart investments, Madam Deputy Speaker, then not just that Barbados would do well, not just that Barbados would do well, but it would mean that we would be creating genuine intergenerational wealth, Madam Deputy Speaker, because for too long, we've had a number of black-owned businesses, to be quite blunt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that had the potential for growth, but lack of succession planning and the like, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a range of other things has meant that they've not been able to move from being good companies to large companies, and being able then to sustain and create that generational wealth. And I think this new type of system can create an opportunity. It's only an opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we must be aggressive enough to want to make it happen. And it means opening up and giving data that we too in government will provide additional intelligence back to the market, so that people can make those strategic decisions in relation to where they will go. Now, on the income tax side, Madam Deputy Speaker, you would recall that we are also reintroducing the mechanism for group relief for losses over $100 million. Those are part of the amendments here. In relation to the research and development credit, that too is reintroduced in order for us to be able to ensure that we focus on those strategic areas that we have identified, in order to make sure that we are aligned with the national priorities. On the jobs credit, I just want to, for the record of the House, because the Prime Minister had indicated in her statement some levels, we've gone back and made some adjustments with respect to the jobs credit. So permit me just to read that specific section, Madam Deputy Speaker, just for the record of the Chamber. And that will be on page 23 of the income tax bill here, 65H, job credit, and it says, with effect from income year 2024, a jobs credit may be claimed by an eligible company at the credit amount specified in subsection 2 that incurs eligible payroll expenditure after January 1st, after 1st January 2024, where that company engages the number of employees specified in subsection 2. And it says, pursuant to subsection 1, the number of employees and the jobs credit amount is set out as follows. A, for up to 50 employees, a credit equal to 25% of eligible payroll expenditure. B, 51 to 100 employees, a credit equal to 50% of eligible payroll expenditure. C, 101 to 150 employees, a credit equal to 75% of eligible expenditure. And D, more than 151 employees, a credit equal to 100% of eligible payroll expenditure. And clause 3, it says, an eligible company shall not be permitted to include in a claim for a jobs credit expenditure that was not incurred in the income year to which the eligible payroll expenditure relates. An eligible company shall not receive a jobs credit unless the company has paid the national insurance contributions payable by the company for all periods before the 1st of January 2024. 2, amounts deducted or withheld from emoluments to employees in respect of their income, or B, where the eligible payroll expenditure can reasonably be considered by the commissioner to be excessive and unreasonable in relation to the company's business. And so you would see, following there, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's some other technical things, but we've sought to ensure in every instance that, as the member for St. Peter caused the ire of some of our business community in relation to his concession bill that he brought here a few weeks ago, that we are consistent, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to how we administer the regulatory requirements for ensuring that your statutory obligations are satisfied. And therefore, it is important to reiterate that this government means business when it comes to labor. And therefore, it is important to be able to identify that. And so the reality of it is that you have to ensure that there is those statutory obligations are complied with, and that would be the case certainly in this instance. As it relates to research and development credit, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is page 26. 65I, with effect from income year 2024, a company may claim a research and development credit of 50% of eligible expenditure incurred after the 1st of January 2024 in relation to qualifying research and development activities. A company shall not be permitted to include in a claim for a research and development credit on the eligible expenditure on qualified research and development activities not incurred in the income year to which the expenditure relates. Company, this is 3, a company shall qualify for a research and development credit where the company is A, subject to corporation tax, and B, carrying out qualified research and development activities. And then it goes on with some more specifics there. Also, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have introduced the prepayments mechanism, which it really is an important element in relation to how government is also refining its tax administration. So usually you would have, as it relates to corporate tax, 3, maybe 4 times a year prepayments. We've shifted to monthly prepayments in order to ensure that there is a smoother collection mechanism for government. And this is important because, as you would know, Madam Deputy Speaker, having restarted the domestic capital markets officially in September of, after the grace period, September 2022, after the 4-year grace period for the debt restructuring, and grace period with respect to the payment of principal. We have restarted the domestic market, and that is coming back to a level that we are satisfied. But in the past, government has had to rely heavily on borrowing and those short-term borrowings in relation to treasury bills and the like in order to be able to finance government's operations. We determined that as we are doing this reform now, it makes sense for us to be able, rather than to wait till the end of the quarter to receive money, that we will allow entities to prepay. So you do your calculations, Madam Speaker, and you prepay, and then you do the reconciliation as appropriate at the appropriate time. But to prepay, allowing government to receive a smoother revenue path, and therefore it means that we don't have to rely so much on the borrowing to be able to finance the delivery of government's operations. So this is a significant adjustment to the way that we are administering the corporate tax system, and therefore will be new, and I'm sure that the appropriate guidance has gone out, not just to the persons who are in scope, but I know that from January of 2025, all persons who are within the domestic space at the tax rate of 9% will also be required to have prepayments in place, and therefore people should start preparing from now to ensure that they have the appropriate mechanism in place to be able to do that. But the Revenue Authority will continue to provide the guidance and support in relation to being able to deal with that. Those are some of the areas, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I will speak to, but there's one area that I also want to ensure is covered for the record of the House, and it relates to the introduction of what we refer to as the patent box. I'm trying to find... So the long and short of it, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that with all of these reforms, and I regret that we did not have the transfer pricing legislation to accompany this, but that will come at a later date. But we took the opportunity to be able to introduce a new mechanism for, particularly as it relates to R&D. As you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, please forgive me, we have been not just pushing the matter in relation to R&D, but given that the reforms that we're doing with the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, that we felt it was important that we are able to open up a space using tax policy and regulations to be able to try to bring, given that the world has moved so aggressively to a content-driven space, that we can utilize this area of a patent box to be able to drive research and development in areas that we believe will be particularly important. And so I want to mention that specifically, especially in subsection, in the Income Tax Act, in the definitions on page 8, it speaks to qualifying intellectual property means the rights to an invention patent, copyright software, additional protection rights for the invention, D, rights to the registration of an industrial design, rights to the registration of integrated circuit topography, F, additional protection rights for a patent for a medicinal product or plant protection product, G, rights from the registration of medicinal or veterinary product, and H, rights from the registration of new plant varieties, and any other right fundamentally important to the patent that is both legally protected and subject to similar approval and registration process. Now, why is this important, Madam Deputy Speaker? As you know, Barbados has a long history, especially in agriculture, with the cane breeding station and those things. And therefore, notwithstanding that history, we need to make sure that we create a framework within which to be able to attract the development of local business, but also others to come to Barbados to do some of that research, to be able to open up a new space in relation to patents and innovation. And I know that again at Newton, Export Barbados is building what is an innovation center to be able to help flesh out some of these areas in order to ensure that we can attract that type of R&D and to focus very clearly on that. Within that space, there's a specific rate for those companies that will engage in those kinds of activities of 4.5%. As part of how we can invite Barbadians to think very creatively, as well as collaborate with whomever across the world, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to not just be consumers of technology, but to help be the engineers and to propagate technology that allows us then to be able to, as I said, not just to be consumers, but to be the designers and the app developers, and effectively, Madam Deputy Speaker, really to earn the type of money that all the others are seemingly doing across the world. Now, as you know full well, the battle in the AI space is intense, and it's very intense, Madam Deputy Speaker. You're seeing bans of certain technologies in certain jurisdictions and all sorts of things. And I believe that we in Barbados, we have an opportunity that was, as they say, was the elephants fighting, the ants and everybody, cockroaches, and will get out of the way. But I believe there's a genuine opportunity for Barbadian designers, entrepreneurs, to work collaboratively with others globally, to be able to create almost like a third party. And I know the honourable member for Parish South will know what that feels like. But seriously, there are opportunities within this space, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I genuinely believe that Barbadians working collaboratively with others can explore. And therefore, it is important that we understand what that would mean, and therefore we are creating the appropriate tax structure and operating structure. I know that there's some other reforms under Business Barbados coming along to be able to do that. And I say that because the qualifying expenditures essentially means expenditures incurred to fund the activities to develop, enhance, protect, maintain, and exploit qualifying intellectual property that are carried out by a company outsourced to any person in Barbados or outsourced to persons outside Barbados that is not a related party and does not include interest payments, building costs, acquisition costs, or any costs that could not be directly linked to a specific intellectual property asset. And I know that for the average person listening, sometimes, Madam Deputy Speaker, they will say, well, you know, the government ain't doing enough to help me achieve something. And oftentimes, because people do not necessarily always follow what we do here in the Parliament, it means that beyond what we do here today, it means we have to meet with the various, not just the stakeholders, as we've done, but to really prime people as to what the opportunities ahead are, working also collaboratively with the financial sector to be able to ensure that if we understand strategically where we're going in these types of areas, then the financing that could be unlocked in the financing to be able to fund these types of activities, and that the potential upside would mean that it is not everything that will be quote-unquote successful, but the upside is significant if we're able to strategically align not just the financing with the talent, with the legislative framework, to be able to work collaboratively with others to be able to bring these types of things to fruition. Now, we've had a number of Barbadians who have done extremely well in relation to the scientific space, and we now need a different mechanism now where we are able to allow them to collaborate globally, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us protect these inventions, but in protecting the inventions, it means that we must be aligned with who will get the inventions to the marketplace in order to ensure that our development rights are protected and that we can earn the appropriate amount of monies from it. Because with the best will in the world, Madam Deputy Speaker, I could have the most brilliant idea and then protect it and got it in my back pocket, but nobody know nothing about it, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if I don't work with you or anybody else to be able to get it to the market in order for it to be successful, then I really would not have achieved the overarching objective of being able to get this stuff to market. So the protection is important, but equally who you collaborate with to be able to ensure that not just your rights are protected, but as the product or service or whatever it is gets into the marketplace, that the right business minds and the ecosystem is in place from a tax reporting perspective, but also in terms of the financing and all of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we now have to make sure that those things are in place. And it is not going to be easy, Madam Deputy Speaker, because in these things, the market moves so quickly sometimes that you could be up today, down tomorrow, because something new, something more attractive comes along and captures the imagination of your target market. And therefore, you must be prepared to accept that when you strike iron, you got to strike it hot, Madam Deputy Speaker, and ensure that you capitalize on all of the investment in as quickly as you can. So that's an important addition to what was announced by the Prime Minister in November in relation to the inclusion of the patent box in order to allow us to be able to drive innovation moving forward. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did not intend to speak so long. I know my colleagues will applaud my brief presentation. but the reality is that we are on a path, I believe, of not just reform, but genuinely, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to unlock opportunities for Bajans. Having unlocked said opportunities, Mr. Speaker, it means that when you open the door, people must have the confidence to be able to go through the door, Mr. Speaker, and shake hands with whoever is on the other side of the door in order to make sure that said opportunity is seized, and for us then to be able to continue to work hard in the best interest of Barbados. And so it is important that we in government, we continue to communicate, we make it and when I say as simple as possible, Mr. Speaker, if you operate in a complex business, then when you're reporting on it, it can't be simple, but we will try to make the process as simple as possible, because you must appreciate that simple means different things to different people depending on where you are. But what we intend to do is to continue to work with the stakeholders. We will make adjustments as appropriate for all of the processes that we're undertaking. We will continue to monitor, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ensure that things are going the way that we would like. If they're not, we will make adjustments as appropriate to ensure that we do not create any administrative issues necessarily for entities. But at the end of the day, Barbados' reputation, Madam Deputy Speaker, in being able to utilize regulations for growth, I think is absolutely paramount. So we are not going to be confusing you just because we want to confuse you. We will confuse you because we want your business to grow. We want you to be able to go and take advantage of the opportunities that we are opening up. By making these amendments, there will be opportunities for other double taxation treaties and access to other places. And therefore, we can tell you, the door open here, it is time to go through, Madam Deputy Speaker. And therefore, that is what we want to be able to as we would say in Bajan parlance, that's what we can be confusing you about, because for too long, I think we have not been as aggressive as we could be. We've had to take these last few years to make sure we right-size and do all the things that we needed to do to ensure that Barbados' reputation can be restored. We have done that, and therefore, as we continue to move forward with our exchange of information framework, with our reporting framework under FATF, the FATCA in relation to the UN, and the illicit flows and the like, Madam Deputy Speaker, our systems of collaboration amongst our regulators, we are confident that so long as that synergy continues and that the private sector continues to be able to work with government, then it will no longer be a conversation as to how much tax, it would be how much profits you're able to make, and therefore being able then to deliver a greater rate of return, not just for the companies, but a greater rate of return for ordinary Barbadians that we want to be able to invest in businesses as part of the transition to this period, the transformation, I should say, the transformation, given our objectives under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, in order to allow us to be able to get out and meet our 60% to debt to GDP ratio by 2035. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am happy to obviously support this bill, and with those few words, I am obliged to you. And I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable member of the opposition, leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Your Honor. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the honourable member's speech this morning is that no one in this chamber listened to him except you and me.